Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
In the previous session, we discussed about social development situation in India, and we had looked into the regional variation in social development situation in India, and we discussed this in the context of market reform, how social development is important for successful market reform. We also looked at the social development situation in some other countries of the world to have a better understanding of where we stand today. Now, today we will be discussing about one most important component or item of social development, which is education. Now, in our directive principles of state policy, we have mentioned that how education is important. We have mentioned our concern about achieving some minimum level of education for everybody, and education has been incorporated in the Millennium Development Goals, also in the Sustainable Development Goals. So, today thus we will be discussing mainly about education, and in that we will be looking at very elementary level, but we will be looking at just literacy. When we will be discussing about education, there are vast area. One can talk about higher education, one can talk about primary education, etc., etc., but we will be mainly focusing on literacy, and we will be particularly discussing patterns of literacy and their social context. Okay. Now, under this we will be touching upon following items. Firstly, we will discuss about impact of educational deprivation. When we talk about education, we have said several times that having at least a minimum level of education for everybody is very essential. So, to understand that or to comprehend that, we will be briefly discussing about impact of what is the impact of education deprivation. If someone is deprived of education, what happens? Okay. Then we will look at literary situation in India. Next, we will briefly discuss about causes of educational deprivation, and then as we mentioned that one important or one striking characteristics in India is educational disparities. So, we will touch upon that area. We will discuss what type of educational disparity prevails in India, and then we will make some regional contrast. Okay. So, these are the topic or these are the areas we will touch upon in today's discussion on education. Now, what is the impact of educational deprivation? Okay. Now, as we mentioned earlier, in India educational diversity is proverbial. At the as we mentioned that at the one end we have highly educated, high level of education among elite section. On the other hand, vast majority of Indian population are still illiterate. Now, if someone is deprived of education, then it obviously affects employment opportunity. And when we say that illiteracy affects employment opportunity, even that is true even for say some manual work, even for an agricultural laborer. It has been found that someone who wants to work as an agricultural laborer, if he is illiterate, he would have less chance of getting employment. And it has been found in many studies that educational deprivation or illiteracy reduces health achievements. It has been found if mother is educated, then children get better health, or mother will enjoy better health. So that way, even having elementary education, even having literacy helps mother and child to enjoy better health. And education obviously exposes a person to corruption and harassment. As it is to get any service from government program, poor people face many types of harassment. But top of it, if someone is illiterate, this harassment increases many times. Like, if someone is illiterate, he or she will not be able to read what is written in the documents, he won't be able to understand, and then he or she may have to sign, put her signature somewhere. So, she will have to put thumb impression without knowing where she is putting her thumb impression, what condition she is agreeing to, etc., etc., and she will have to depend on some middleman to help her in all these matters, and this exposes her to lot of corruption and harassment, and it undermines the ability to participate successfully in modern economy and society. Just imagine if someone is illiterate, then that person will not be able to use many modern amenities. For instance, even the basic thing which they require, like supposing if one has to open a bank account or want to use ATM facility, if someone is illiterate, he or she will not be able to make use of ATM facilities, or this type of many other facilities which are very basic, which is required nowadays for day to day living, particularly because of the illiteracy result into a digital divide, and a vast majority of population will be on the losing side of digital divide. That means there is this whole world of internet, etc., etc., and this huge group of population who are illiterate, they will not be able to participate in this digital world, and and as a consequence they'll suffer. And obviously, if someone is illiterate, that hampers practice of democracy. Of course, when we say that hampers practice of democracy, we do not mean just voting for once in a year, once in 5 years. This type of, even if someone is illiterate, one can still cast his or her vote during the general elections, but we are not talking about that type of democracy. Now, nowadays, actually what happens, because of the local self-government, because of the panchayats, what democracy requires that one should be able to participate in the Gram Sabha meetings, and many development programs has to be discussed in the villages, and villagers should know what a particular program offers, what is their entitlement, etc., what they should get, what they should not, what they may not require, or where something is going wrong, etc., etc. Now local self government or panchayat, for successful functioning of panchayat, this type of day-to-day participation of the villagers is required. Now imagine if the villagers are illiterate, this local self-government or this day-to-day participative democracy cannot work. So this is democracy will be gets hampered because of this type of illiteracy. Okay. Now let us look at the literacy situation in India. What is the literacy situation in India? Now let us look at some figures of progress of literacy in India. Now in the beginning of the last century, in the year 1900, only 5% of Indians were literate. Okay. Now when we became independent, when we got independent, that time only 18% of Indians, that means even less than 1/5 of Indians were literate. Now in the year 1991, when we moved into market reform, or when market reform were introduced in our country, that time around half of Indians were illiterate, were literate, and in the year 2001, 65% of Indians were literate, and in the year 2012, 74% of Indians are literate. So there is a progress of literacy in India, but what is interesting, or the point that we would like to know, this is not very impressive, not at all an impressive figure. If we compare with other countries of the world, like for instance, if we compare with some of the so-called backward countries of the world, like sub-Saharan African countries, literacy rate in most of the sub-Saharan African countries, which are considered as a very backward countries, literacy rate is much higher than India. So India, in terms of literacy, is lagging behind even from the so-called backward countries of Africa, where literacy rate is above around 80% or so. Now not only that, actually there is apart from that, there is also a lot of disparity in male and female literacy. Like if we look at the figure of 7+ age groups literacy rate, you see that there is a lot of disparity. Like whereas for the male this figure is 64%, for female it is only 39%. Okay, and similarly, if we look at the mean years of schooling or median years of schooling, everywhere actually there is a lot of disparity between men and women. So there is, and Indian Constitution talks about education for up to 14 years. Okay, now if you see that involves 8 years of education. Now percentage of children having 8 years of education, this percentage for female is 16%, and for the male it is 44%. Okay. Now see, there is a wide gap, gender gap, in terms of educational achievement in India. Okay, and this is 1991 figure, but this gap is continuing still today. Another important thing is that literacy rate varies very widely in terms of socio-economic background of population groups. Like for instance, if someone is from Kerala and someone lives in the urban area, and if someone is male, then the chance of his being literate is more than 90%. If someone is a male living in Kerala in urban area, then the chance of his being literate is more than 90%, almost 10% that person will be literate. Whereas if you look at the other end, if someone lives in Rajasthan and and she is a female and lives in rural area and belongs to SC community, then there is only 5% possibility that she will be literate. Just see, this that chance of being literate or illiterate depends on depends on the socio-economic background of the person, where he or she is located, whether she lives in urban area and rural area. So this way, someone who lives in rural Kerala and someone is female, she will have a possibility of little more than 80% chance of being literate. And if you take a look at the all India figure, urban India, someone lives in the urban India, there is chance that 70% possibility chance that that person will be literate. And same figure, if someone lives in rural India, then that will be around 40%, almost half. And if someone belongs to rural India and SC or belong to scheduled caste, this probability will be 30%. And similarly, if she is female and belong to scheduled caste, that possibility is further down to around less than 20%. So you see, to what extent a person will be literate or will have the opportunity to be literate or illiterate, this depends on the socio-economic background of that person. It depends on where that person lives, whether she lives in urban area or rural area, which region she lives, okay, and what type of community she belongs. All these factors greatly influence the possibility of being literate or illiterate. Okay. We will look at this figure now. Now, this figure it presents literacy rate, age group wise literacy rate, okay, age group wise literacy rate of India, China and Kerala. Okay. This is of course this graph was prepared based on little old data, 81, 82 literacy data, but actually this graph shows a trend which is valid even today. And actually this type of projection, when we get age group wise data, this helped us to have some insight, some better insight, like how literacy is progressing, etc. For example, let us look at the figure at 60 plus age group. Okay. Now, if we look at the figure of 60 plus age group, those who were in the 60 plus age group in the year 1980, 81, 82, now look at the figure for India and for China and for Kerala. Now you see, India and China a literacy rate was almost similar, almost similar in terms of literacy. This age group at that time was at the almost same level, whereas Kerala literacy rate was quite high. Okay. Now, suppose if we go for a backward projection, okay. Now, 40 years ago, what was the situation? Now, 40 years ago, that means 40 years ago, this age group, those who belong to the cohort of 60 plus age group, 40 years ago, that means around the year 1940, they belong to the age group of 20 to 24. Okay. Now, that means 40 years ago also, we can say roughly by backward projection that 40 years ago also they were in the same level, actually, because after 20 usually one can expect that one may not become literate. If someone was illiterate at the age of 20, 24, the same thing will continue when this cohort enter into the cohort of 60 plus age group. So, 40 years ago, that means when they were in the age group of 20-24, that time this was the literacy level. That means in the year 1940, India and China literacy rate was almost comparable, okay, and Kerala was advanced. So, say in the 1940, what was the education literacy rate of people who belong to the age group of 20 to 40? We can say that for this age group of 20 to 40, literacy rate for India and China was comparable. Now, what happened after 40 years? What happened after 40 years? Now, after 40 years, this age group, after 40 years, this disparity has increased. Like after 40 years, those who belong to the similar age group, 20-24 years age group, here you see that China has advanced so much, India has progressed little, is less in comparison to China, and Kerala as it is was very advanced. So, that means in the 1940, the age those who belong to the age group of 20 to 24, India and China, the literacy rate was comparable, but with this with the span of time in 40 years, the disparity increased, in the sense that whereas China progressed quite a lot in terms of literacy rate, India lagged behind. So, this type of data, with the help of this type of data, with backward and forward projection, we can get this type of insight. Another thing which is clear from this data, that in India, we can infer from this data that it is not that in India, at the age of 20-24, a vast majority of Indians were illiterate, they could not become literate, but this will continue even for years to come. Many Indians will remain illiterate. Okay. So, if at the age of 24, if this percentage of Indians remain illiterate, that means for many years to come, for another 40 or 50 years, this cohort will become will continue to remain illiterate. That is also another issue. So this type of inference we can make from this type of data. Okay. Now, let us look at the mean years of schooling. Like here, as you see that for India, the mean years of schooling is only 2.4 years, whereas for China it is 5 years, for Sri Lanka it is 7 years, for South Korea it is 9 years. Okay. So this shows how India is lagging behind in terms of education. Okay. Now, we have so far discussed that in India lags behind in terms of literacy. Okay. Now, the question that comes, that what is the cause of this type of educational deprivation in our country? Now, we will try to look into some of the explanation of why this type of educational deprivation we have in our country. Sending a child to school requires a great deal of efforts, especially in unprivileged families. It is not easy for an unprivileged or marginalized family to send a child to the school. Often we are not able to comprehend this. Like firstly, for sending a child, what they would require, for particularly those who are marginalized section, they would require money for books. They will have to pay some fees, or they also have to provide the children clothes. Like say for example, when in the poor family, when the children they do not go to school, they may not need that type of clothing, when they stay at home, but when they have to send in school, they would also require some proper clothing. Okay. Now, another thing, the child has to be free from full-time domestic work. Like say what happened in the poorer family, they often depend on the child for many household work, like say for getting drinking water, for collecting fodder, etc., etc. The child children may be engaged in those type of work. Now, if they will have they want to send their child to the school, that means they will not be able to do those work now. So that work has to be managed by somebody else. That may not be that easy. Also, children they require, and what is important, that when they go to school, they would need help with homework. This is a major issue, because most of in the marginalized section, parents may be illiterate. Now when they send the children to the school, when they come back from the school, they will have homework. Now they would require to help them in to complete to do the homework. Now which the parents may not be able to do. So that means they may have to look for a help, or look for a private tutor, which involves a lot of expenses, which may be very difficult for this type of families to afford. Okay. And what is important, sustain interest of the child in learning. Like after all this overcoming all this problem, what is important, that going to the school should be interesting for the child. That child should when they go to school, they should enjoy what is being taught in the school. Supposing in the school, if nothing is taught, or what is taught is not at all interesting, then or the way things are taught, if the child doesn't learn anything, then actually there is no point. The parents may feel there is no point to sending the child to the school, because with all this overcoming all these difficulties, spending money, etc., etc., taking all this effort, they are sending the child to the school, but they are not learning anything, and the child is also not enjoying going to the school. So you see how and then the child will drop out. So see how these are the see how difficult it is. Okay. Now we will continue to look at the causes of educational deprivation. Now there are three specific obstacles usually mentioned why children do not go to school. One thing is often mentioned, that low parental motivation. It is said that parents may not be motivated to send their children to the school. Like if we look at some broad reasons, so why why you have education deprivation. Now often it is mentioned that parents of the marginalized families, they are not motivated to send their children to the school. Second thing is that it is often said that economic deprivation, because sending the children to the school may involve some cost, spending some money. Poor parents may not be able to do that, and because of this type of economic deprivation, they may not want to send their children to the school. So economic deprivation is one of the cause for education deprivation. And another third factor which is mentioned is that poor quality of school. Like it is said that often schools, particularly the government schools, which are maybe of government primary schools in the rural areas or in the backward regions, are of not of that good quality. So children may not learn going to that type of school. So that may be another reason. So these three reasons are mentioned as causes of education deprivation. Now let us now look at this, examine these causes. Like first, parental motivation. Is it that parents are not motivated to send their school? Is this correct? That Indian parents have little interest in education is a myth, like now why this myth is being spread, because particularly the official circle, if you go to in any office for the which is in charge of spreading of primary education, etc., etc., the officials will tell you, how can we educate the children from the poor family, because parents, they do not want to send their children to the school. Now actually this continued from the British, when we were on the British rule. From that time onwards, this myth has been spread, but what can we do? Parents are not keen in educating the children to the school. That is why we are not able to spread education. But that is a completely myth that is being spread to rationalize state's failure. Like if literacy rate is very low in a particular state, that state may be viewed in a bad light. So bureaucracy would say that, or political leaders say, parents are not motivated to send their children to school, so what can we do? But actually, if you see that if there is any problem on parental motivation, that is mainly for female education, educating their daughters, their parents may not be motivated. But if you ask anyone, or the many survey has been found that if you ask parents from the poorer family, now every parents are keen to educate their children. Even in the very marginalized section, if many surveys were done, and when the question was asked, do you want that send your child to the school, do you want that your son should get educated, always the answer was positive. They said, yes, we want that our children should get education, etc. So that is a complete myth. Parents are keen to educate their children even in the very marginalized section of the society, but there is some problem of parental motivation, particularly for female education. Okay, now when the question comes to educate daughters or girl child, parents motivation is little less. There are several reasons for that, but it has been found that that this motivation, it is not that this type of when parents in some regions, they do not they may not be keen to educate their daughters, this can be easily changed. Like for example, I conducted one study during long ago during the adult literacy campaign. That time we found in our study that in the tribal regions, when the adult literacy centers were started, it was the females or girls, they were very keen in attending those literacy centers, and they became literate. Rather the male members were not interested in becoming literate. So actually through campaign, now we are trying to wondering how this has happened. Now what we found that as it is the female members were deprived from many amenities, but then they knew that how becoming literate is important. So when there is a campaign for spreading literacy, they did not want to miss that opportunity. They were regularly coming to the literacy center, and after the campaign, it was found that in that area female members become literate, and that was more successful for female members than the male members. So actually, even parents, if they are not interested or that if they are not that much keen in sending their daughters for education, it has been found that if there is a positive environment, this attitude can change. That it is not that this attitude cannot be changed. Now what is important, that a social consciousness about the centrality of elementary education is needed. Actually there should be widespread consciousness about why elementary education is important. That type of if we can have that type of consciousness, this parental motivation problem, particularly which exists for particularly the girl child, that will not be there. Okay. This is about parental education. Now what about economic deprivation? Is economic deprivation is a cause? Poor families sometimes depend on child labor for their survival. It is often said that why poor families, they do not send their children to the school, because they depend on the child labor for their survival. So that may be the reason why children may not be able to go to the school. That is one thing often mentioned. And another thing is that the poverty makes it harder to meet the direct cost of schooling. Though we say the primary schools are free, but still there is some cost is involved. Okay. Now let us examine these two arguments. Firstly, child labor. Now if we look at the data, we will find that that child labor comes on the way of sending children to school is also a myth, because it has been found that full-time workers account for a small proportion of out of the school children. Now let us look at this one table here. Now if you look at this table, you see here we have workers, and among the workers this is the children aged 5 to 14 years. Okay. This is the children engaged in different activity. Now among them there are workers and non-workers. Those who are workers, the children, those who are workers, among them it is only 10% not attending school. Among non-worker it is around 90%. So those who are working, they can attend school. Only 10% of them. So this figure shows that only 10% of them are not attending school. So when you say the child labor prevents someone a child to attend school, that is not correct. The proportion of children whose work activities are incompatible with that of the school is likely to be small, because school hours are short and schools are closed for about half of the days of the year. Now why, if the children want to get engaged in child labor, sometimes they can do that even after attending school, because schools may be in the village, the schools may be working for 2-3 hours. Okay. And most of the time of the year in India, schools are closed. There will be summer vacation, there will be puja vacation, there will be many other vacations, etc., etc. So if some child are engaged in child labor, that may not come on the way of his being enrolled in the school. Now actually it is the other way around. It is not that children do not attend school because of the child labor. Okay, what happens, children, they get enrolled in the school, but after getting enrolled in the school, sometime for various reasons they may drop out. They may not find any interest in the school, so they may drop out. Now when they drop out from the school, then parents, they think that if when they drop out from the school, if they remain idle, they will do many mischief. So rather it is better to engage them in some work. And so it is rather when children drop out from the school, then they get engaged in child labor. It is actually it is reverse causation. It is not that due to child labor children are not able to attend the school. It is when they drop out, then only they get engaged in earning. Okay. Now as I say, we are looking at the direct cost of schooling. We mentioned that actually sending a child to the school involves some cost categories, but one would say that that is not correct, because primary school is supposed to be free, but actually having no fee doesn't mean that free education. Even when a school may not charge any tuition fee, sometimes even those schools may charge some development fee, etc., etc. That is one thing. And also sending a child to the school involves some other costs, like providing clothing to the child, providing them books and other items, giving them tiffin, etc. So limited education should not involve any expenditure for the parents, but that doesn't happen. In our country, even school is even if school doesn't charge any tuition fee, but that still involves some expenses for the parents, and for the poor we may think that that is nothing, but actually maybe being middle class we may feel that is nothing, but even that expenses, that becomes too much for the parents to meet that type of expenses. So in fact, so that is how elementary education in India is far from free. Even when parents are wants to send their children to the free primary school, so-called free primary school, that involves some sort of expenses, which sometimes this poor family, say agricultural laborer family, may find it difficult to meet. Like for example, I have mentioned that when the children go to the school, after they come back from the school, they would require help of a private tutor, maybe because someone will have to help them, because they may not be able to, schools are run such a way that they may not be able to learn much in the school. So when they come back, they get some homework which they will have to do. Now illiterate parents may not be able to help them in that, so then they may have to engage a private tutor, now which is very expensive for these parents. The parents cannot afford to spend money for helping the child to do the homework. So sending school itself involves some sort of expenses. Okay. Now let us look at other factor, the school quality. We often say school, what is the children drop out from this school because of the school quality. The quality of schooling has an important influence on school attendance. This is very important point. Like Indian school have school leave much to be desired. Actually, the schools that we have, particularly primary schools, they have very inadequate infrastructure. For instance, 27% of the primary schools had only one classroom. Sometimes rural schools, if you get, they may not have any classroom. Okay, and 27 of primary school had only one classroom. So can you imagine, there is one classroom, and the children, they belong to different classes, maybe class 1, class 2, class 3, class 4. All of them will have to occupy only one classroom that they have. Okay, so 27% schools are of that way. 21% has a single teacher, and single teacher handles children belonging to 5 different grades in a single classroom. Single teacher school is a very important feature of primary schooling in our country. Schools have only one teacher. Now you can imagine, there is only one teacher in the school, that teacher will have to manage children belonging to various classes. Very interestingly, NCERT has conducted one study, and they have developed a methodology, that how a single teacher can manage children belonging to different classes and in one room. So you can imagine, that is a very much in thing, that one teacher handling children belonging to various classes, that often the teachers need to do, and you can easily imagine what type of learning can happen in this type of when we have this type of infrastructure. And more than 60% had at the most 2 teachers. So so school may have a primary school, 60% school will have 2 teachers, and sometimes school may not have any room at all, any classroom. See, look at this picture. It shows that the teacher is running a school in the open. This is also very common. This is also common. Sometimes a school may not have any building for conducting classes. So this way also schools are being run in our country, and the children may belong to different classes, and you can imagine that what type of how this hampers the learning of the children. Okay. Now we are discussing about school quality. Low levels of teachers' accountability have serious is a problem. Like low level of teacher accountability. Now what happened in the government schools? What happened in the rural primary schools? Actually, a job of a primary teacher is a prized job, because in our country no employment opportunities available, particularly in the rural area. No salaried job is available. Okay. Now only job which is available is a job of a primary teacher. Now so what happened, often for getting a job as a primary teacher, to get one has to give lot of bribe, etc., etc., but one would not mind. This becomes a common practice, and after a person gets job, and that is because there is a government job, this is so much security, and the teacher may not be accountable at all. The teacher may get engaged in his other type of work, in his agricultural work, etc., etc. Most of the time a teacher may often spend in his in agricultural activity, and he or she may neglect teaching in the school. So low level of teachers accountability, and because there is no accountability, whether teacher is teaching or not teaching. Actually there is no accountability. Parents have no means in keeping the teachers on their toes. Like for instance, poorer parents, they are so much marginalized. They think that parents are, teachers are someone who is educated, someone is very superior. So they often cannot, ask the teacher for be more accountable. They cannot question the teacher's behavior, etc. Because those who come to the rural primary school, they come from very marginalized section, and the teacher in the schools most of the time will belong to a slightly may come from slightly better of section from the rural community, and maybe belonging to a higher caste often. So because of that difference, the poorer parents, they cannot challenge, they cannot ask the teacher to be more accountable, to be etc. And there is something called formal inspection system. There is a school inspector, there is supposed to be a school inspector, etc., etc., but in our country that inspection system, that government will send an inspector who will find out whether the schools are running properly, etc., etc. That doesn't work. When the inspector comes, if at all the inspector visits a primary school, which they rarely do to a rural primary school, they know what is going on, and actually they give that schools are running, they give a report the schools are running properly. This type of understanding they have. So the school inspection system is not effective, and also teachers have little incentives for exerting themselves. Now teachers also are not that much motivated, because even if they do hard work, they do not get much reward. Like say, teachers often may think that actually the children who are coming from the poorer family, they may not be able to learn, etc., etc., and hence and particularly they may not be able to get job, etc. So what is the point in teaching them? And even if I do hard labor, I will not get any reward, etc. So, teachers are also, they do not get that much motivated to exert themselves, you know. And another important thing, the teaching profession in our society is politically very powerful. In our country, in the rural area, you know, teachers are politically very powerful. You know, in the rural primary school, the teachers, they are the only educated educated person in the village. Okay, they are the main educated person in the village. So what happens, you know, block administration, when they have to conduct some survey or some data collection or spreading some message to the villagers, they depend on the teachers. And on the other hand, teachers are also very politically you know, very active, like for you know, like some states, like you will find often panchayat, those who contest election for panchayat, often they are primary school teachers, because political parties, they find that the, you know, school teachers are, they are in contact with many people, and they are they have some sort of education, and so political parties often give nomination to the teachers as a candidate for panchayat election, and these teachers get elected as a panchayat member. So you see, teachers are and that is how teachers get motivated to become involved politically. And sometimes, you know, for getting this job as a teacher in the rural primary school, they may enter into they may try to become closer to the political parties, because through that type of avenue they are able to get some job as get the teaching job. So as a result of that, you know, teachers are very politically very powerful, and if they are very powerful, so you know, they can neglect their duties, and nobody can question them, you know. That is that is one component. Now, defective teaching method is another important area. The rural school, you know, lacks classroom activity. You know, there are a lot of things are being said about how one should be taught, etc., but none of this are practiced in the rural school. Now, and the way things are taught, the students are not able to comprehend what is being taught in the class. And another thing is that sometimes children from the they are afraid of getting beating or humiliation from the teacher. That is also there, and also social discrimination in the classrooms are a common thing. Actually, sometimes what happens, the teacher belonging to higher caste may not want to even touch a student coming for lower caste, etc., etc. So this type of social discrimination is also there, and sometimes, you know, the student belong to a group of students belong to higher caste group may sometimes ridicule those who belong to lower caste group. So this type of social discrimination is also there, and this affects school quality. So you know, these are the causes of now if we try to now let us explain what is the cause of education deprivation in our country. Some combination of inadequate parental motivation, economic deprivation, and low quality of schooling causes dropping out of schools. You know, we have discussed about these three factors: inadequate parental motivation, we talked about economic deprivation, we have also talked about low quality of schooling. Now, actually, one can explain why children drop out from the school, or why there is education deprivation. That is a combination of all these reasons putting together. One thing can be said, parental motivation is very high for male education in most social groups. You know, there may be some problem for female education, but parental motivation is very high in our country today. Parental motivation is very high for male education. In case of female education, and additional issue of low parental motivation, there. Okay, in case of female education, parental motivation may not be there that much, and child labor is not a major obstacle, even though work burden is an obstacle, but child labor is not the cause. Okay, and low quality of schooling discourages parents and children for school attendance. This is a serious issue. Low quality of schooling is an important cause. Now see what has happened. Now if we now we have something like we have midday meal program, etc., etc. After these midday meal programs are introduced, now that help to increase enrollment in the schools. That is very important. But but after that, what we have found, in spite of increase in enrollment, actually children are not learning. So now that is the quality of education has become an important issue. Bringing children to the school is not that much an issue now after we introduce midday meal program. Okay, but what happened, in the midday meal program, schools are run where midday meal has been introduced. What has happened actually? Often these schools are referred as khichdi school, because the khichdi, the food that they provide. So it is often said that the children go to the school mainly for eating, and teaching, learning is neglected there. And so what is found, that children are coming to the school because the midday meal is provided. They come to the school, they get promoted from class one class to another class. But recent survey has shown that someone who is in class 5 may not know, may not be able to solve a arithmetic problem which one is taught maybe in class 1 or class 2. Similarly, thing is true about reading, writing, etc. Okay, so students are coming to the school, but they are not learning. So school quality is very crucial now. And now what is important, that to improve what is important, to improve the school quality has become an important issue. Another thing, actually we have found that for female education, low parental motivation, that has been overcome to some extent, as I mentioned earlier also, that we have a program of providing bicycle to the girls if they enroll in the high school, when they enroll in the high school. And what happens, through this type of program, what is happening, that when a bicycle cycle is provided to the schools, when the parents come to know that if they send their daughters to the school, they will be provided bicycles, so commuting will not be a problem. So they get, and what happens, all the girls of the village together will get encouraged to go to school, and that is important. If all the girls of the village are going to the school, then usually the enrollment of the girls would increase. So this type of programs have contributed to some extent to overcome this type of problem of low parental motivation, or but what is important is the school quality, quality of schooling, that is very important. Okay. Now of course there is some good news. What is the good news? That there is every reason to expect parents and children to respond positively to public initiatives. Why? That expectancy amply confirmed by recent experiences. Like say for example, what is the good news? The good news is that what we have found, that child labor is not the cause. If supposing if we have found that children are not able to attend school because they are engaged in child labor, but we have found that child labor is not the cause. Now if child labor would have been a cause, then we could have done very little. Or if we have found that parental motivation is a problem, now we have mentioned that for male for education, parental motivation is not a problem, but for educating the female that may be a problem, but with some incentive it is possible to overcome this. Okay. With this we conclude this session. Thank you.